This podcast may contain content that is graphic and disturbing in nature. Listener discretion is advised. A 911 call brings authorities to the home of a frantic wife whose husband has just died from an apparent suicide. But a closer look into this woman's life would reveal that bad luck seemed to have a way of following her. This is the Raynella Leath story. Welcome back to all of our listeners and to you, Amy. Hi.
Hey.
Today's kind of a special day, too, because we have a special guest with us today, don't we?
Yeah.
Alan's with us. And with our moving in our houses, this is the first time the four of us, the four very best friends, are back together again,
Yes,
right?
no, that's true. It's great.
It's kind of exciting. We have good stuff going on. We're also back at school now, so we're quite busy, even though we just began the semester, but we still found time to attend this year's True Crime Festival in Dallas.
So much fun. It was so great to meet so many of our listeners.
It was. And we were able to see some of our, not only listeners and supporters, but some of our good friends, people we collaborated with. We did, a special event with LA Not So Confidential, which was wonderful. Love working with them. We're really quite lucky in this regard. And I certainly love finding out projects that our colleagues are working on as well. It inspires us. Kind of like for me, conferences, I think you feel the same, right? They rejuvenate me.
I love conferences.
Right. You go to a lot of them.
I do.
And I know how much it, inspires both of us.
Yeah.
So we'll keep everyone posted for any events that we might be attending in the future as well. For now, though, I'd like to turn our attention to the Raynella Leath story. Raynella was born in an eastern mountain town in Tennessee on October 25th, 1948, but moved with her family shortly after to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, where she attended high school. She also attended East Tennessee State University, where she was studying nursing, and that's where she met Ed Dossett, who was planning on going to law school. The pair fell in love, married in 1969, and had 3 children together, who they raised outside of Knoxville on Ed's family farm of over 150 acres.
That sounds like a dream.
Doesn't that?
Yes.
When we were looking at places, we were just looking at like an acre, and it felt so sprawling.
How many dogs do you think they had?
Well, they raised cattle. Ed was like a country boy, and so it was a farm. It was like their dream come true. It was really their paradise. Raynella also had a high-level position in nursing, and Ed was elected the county district attorney general. So these two were a power couple by all descriptions. They were very well respected. They were very supportive of each other. Everyone who commented said that they seemed like they had just such a loving, solid, committed relationship.
Let me guess, things aren't always what they seem.
Well, in this case, tragically, Ed would be just 43 years old when he received a terminal cancer diagnosis. Oh. I know, right? So young. But Amy, it wasn't the cancer that killed him. Rather, he was involved in a fatal farming accident, having been found seemingly trampled by his own cattle one day in July 1992.
Do you know about how long that was after his diagnosis?
Very quickly.
Oh, wow.
I believe that he had colon cancer, but it had spread rapidly. So we're talking about, months.
So he wasn't so ill that he wasn't able to work anymore. It sounds like he was still out there.
No, in fact, let me tell you, according to Raynella, even though Ed was very sick of this, he really wanted to feed his cattle that day. And so she helped him get down to the feeding area. It's not exactly like it's right behind your house, like you let your dog out, but the cattle area is a little bit further. But then she left him there to feed the cattle and to spend time with them. According to her, she went back to the house, and when she returned, she found Ed, who had seemingly been trampled.
Was he very fragile at this point?
He was fragile.
People get ill. Yeah.
Yes. He was at the end of terminal cancer, so he was.
Okay.
So while there was a lot of sympathy for Raynella, there was also some suspicion over her story. Everyone knew that Ed was dying at this point. At first, when Ed was diagnosed, he was still healthy, but with some cancer diagnoses, as you probably have witnessed, and as I have, the deterioration could be very rapid. So even though he didn't reveal it at first, quickly people did know that he was dying. And they figured that perhaps even if the circumstances or the cattle trampling was a little suspicious and maybe not entirely true, it was probably Ed's wishes, because an accidental death would pay more from a double indemnity clause in his life insurance than if he died from cancer.
Quick question. What was his cause of death?
They called it a fatal farming accident. That was his, I don't know.
But I wonder, did a cattle smash his trachea or step on his chest?
That specifically, I don't know,
Okay.
but I do know that it was designated for fatal farming accident.
Okay.
And there was evidence that he had been trampled, yes, on his chest.
Okay.
So likely it was, a blow, some type of trauma to his breathing. Again, a little suspicious here. People also question if Ed was so sick, why would he be out? Shouldn't he be home, in bed? Any way you want to look at this, there were others that also thought Ed was the kind of guy who probably wanted Raynella to have more money. So,
But how do you die? How do you die by suicide in that way?
it's not suicide, it's an accident.
No, I know, but it sounds like some people are suggesting that maybe he purposely did something.
Right. They are suggesting that. So how would you die? Possibly by taking something. So toxicology here. Hold on to that thought.
Okay. I gotcha.
There could be some toxicology
He could have been
involved.
incapacitated.
And then kind
Gotcha.
of put himself in that situation.
Understand.
It was something I was asking myself as well, though. I was like, do you just lay down? And, other people suspected that perhaps Raynella was responsible for getting a 2-week Ed down there and placing him in that position. Not a lot of people thought that, though, because of the nature of their relationship and because they said also she was a nurse and she was his full-time nurse, and they said she took excellent care of him. It was obvious.
So it sounds like she would have known other ways to have him die peacefully.
I think so. I think the real insinuation here is that she was in on this and that they both did it for the greater good of the family and the kids. And so no one was willing to begrudge them the extra money.
Okay.
What was surprising, though, Amy, is that Raynella didn't stay single very long. Just 6 months after Ed's death, she married David Leath, a local barber, someone who occasionally helped with the farm, and a good friend of both Ed and Raynella's. What happened was that David's property kind of bordered theirs, or it was very close. And so he often was out farming on his own property and would help them. Very neighborly. This is kind of one of those.
So they were having an affair?
No, I don't think they were having an affair. No, there was never an insinuation that they were. What I think was almost that it was very practical for Raynella. She had to make a plan for her life and for her children.
She was quite young.
Yes, she was quite young. She was about 42 at the time.
Gotcha.
And I do think that she knew David he was a very good friend of theirs. I don't believe they were having an affair. Both had children from their previous marriages, as I had already said, and Dave had one daughter named Cindy from a previous marriage. The pair seemed happy together, but the dynamic was very different with Raynella and David. They were not like the same team that Raynella and Ed were. Rather, Raynella was more of the dominant personality, and he was a little bit more submissive. It was kind of like Raynella who ran the show. And by all accounts, she had a very dominant personality, but her first husband, Ed, did as well, I believe. He was very outspoken.
So let me guess, he moved into Raynella's home.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. I think they combined their properties, but she had the bigger home. And while Raynella was happy for some time, reportedly, tragedy again struck just 2 years later when her 11-year-old young son, Eddie Jr., was killed in a car accident.
Oh.
Yeah, it's sad, but it's even sadder because unfortunately it was Raynella's 15-year-old daughter, Maggie, who was driving the car without a license.
Oh, geez.
She had a learner's permit. And although Raynella said she was in the car with Maggie at the time of the crash, it appeared that this was not true.
She was saying that to help her daughter.
Yes, she absolutely was, because other witnesses reported that she wasn't, but she got on the scene real quickly.
The daughter was okay, I'm assuming?
The daughter was okay. Initially, too, Maggie was charged with a crime. I'm not sure exactly what the charges were. Of course, she was driving illegally. It might have been vehicular manslaughter. However, the prosecutor would later dismiss these charges, and most speculated this was due to the lasting influence of Raynella and Ed Dossett, her first husband. So Raynella and Maggie, went on with their lives. Unfortunately, the son has passed, but no legal price to her daughter Maggie or to herself. However, not so long after her son was killed, Raynella would find herself in the middle of yet another crime. And this time, she might not walk away so easily. You see, as it turned out, her first husband, Ed, was hiding a pretty big secret. He had been having an affair with his secretary, Kay Walker, for years, which I was surprised to learn because of just the very nature of how people describe the relationship. So Raynella didn't find this out for years. And it wasn't until after Ed's death that she found out. So after Ed died, and this was 1995, Kay was in the middle of divorce proceedings with her husband, Steve Walker, who then learned that his son was not biologically his, but had been fathered by Ed Dossett.
Oh, geez.
Right?
Okay.
So Steve decided to contact Raynella to discuss their situation, believing that they were both victims. They'd be on the same side of the situation, right? They were both wronged by their spouses. I think, he just wanted information as well. And Raynella, invited him to come to her home, saying that she thought she could actually help him. She said that she had some papers for him regarding his son that she believed would help him in a custody hearing. Because even though he found this out, this was his son, and he was in a custody battle now. And I believe, I'm not sure, but I believe that Kay was kind of leveraging this. Well, he's not even your son. So Raynella is saying, I have something that can help you.
Okay.
And so I think Steve was very eager to meet with her. And according to Steve, Raynella picked him up at his auto shop on the morning of May 26, 1995, and the two drove out to her farm to discuss the situation. But once at the farm, and much to Steve's shock, Raynella pulled a gun on him, yelling at him that she was going to kill him and take his son and raise his son.
What?
Right? This is what Steve's reporting. And Raynella took a shot at Steve, missing him, which gave Steve time to run. She fired at him again, but he fell, dodging that bullet. And again, Raynella took aim, telling Steve in a very kind of matter-of-fact way that, wow, she used to be a better shot than this. She was on a rifle team in college.
Oh.
But still, she's saying this as she's shooting at this man. Like, oh, well, I used to be better than this. But by this time, Steve got really lucky because the weapon was out of bullets. And Steve was able to flee the scene unscathed. This is crazy, right?
Yeah.
Both filed police reports. But Raynella had a very different story, claiming that Steve had shown up on her property acting crazy and attempting to urinate on Ed's grave, which was somewhere on the farm property. The police found Steve's version of events to be much more credible, and they charged Raynella with attempted murder.
I guess the gunshot, they found bullets.
Yeah,
and
the bullets.
maybe they had eyewitnesses.
Her story didn't make sense either, whereas his did. They had phone records, I'm sure. So they found him to be much more credible. She got really lucky, though, Amy, because this is attempted. She was charged with attempted murder. We always talk about the severity of charges. She took a plea with reduced charges from attempted murder to assault. So guess what her sentence was?
I'm assuming it was non-custodial.
That's a good guess, and that would be correct. She got 6 years of probation, an expunged record to follow.
I'm assuming there was a restraining order, at least to keep Steve safe.
Oh, I'm sure there was a restraining order, but with an expungement, that would mean afterwards there was no record of the conviction in the first place. This is for attempted murder.
Yeah, that's surprising. Well, they had ties to law enforcement, right?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, this is one that's a little harder to escape. Do you think the same would be true if she was a man?
No, not at all.
Right.
I guess this is one time where gender works in your favor.
Yeah, I guess so, right? And maybe she wasn't committing necessarily, a gender crime per se. She's also, a female, an affluent female with ties to law enforcement. But I mean, I read this, I was like, wow, she really got some benefit here.
Yeah.
All right. Meanwhile, Raynella and David continued their lives together, and in 1996, the pair revised their wills, essentially leaving each other everything in the event of either of their deaths, which really kind of cut out their children.
Okay.
Yeah, I know. David had owned some family property, as I said, next to Raynella's, which is why he was often available to help Ed with the farm. But in the event of his death, this would go now exclusively to Raynella with these revisions of the will.
Now I see where this is going.
Right? Okay, in 1998, Raynella even got back into politics, publicly showing support for a candidate running for district attorney, a position that her first husband, remember, Ed, had held. And the candidate won. And, it was speculated that she had a lot to do with that. She was very good at politicking. Shortly before the year 2000, though, Amy, David began seeing neurologists for early onset dementia. And by the year 2000, he had retired his position as a barber. Raynella complained that he had become hateful and depressed as a result of his condition, noting in her diary that David was mean and controlling, and she was just getting sick of it. David saw a doctor regularly for the next 2 years to assess and monitor his dementia. But on March 13th, 2003, a panicked Raynella called 911 at 11:23 a.m., begging for help to come quickly because her husband had shot himself. David had a gunshot wound in his forehead, above his left eye, which caused his death. But there were 2 other rounds fired, one which landed in the headboard of his bed, which was where David was found in bed, and a third gunshot which pierced through the mattress. Police were initially suspicious because of these extra shots. And also David's hand was seemingly curled up underneath his body and the gun was not in it or close enough to it. So they asked Raynella to recount the details of the morning. And she told them that she had left David's breakfast on the nightstand for him after they watched some morning television together. And she was on her way out the door when David said he might go to the Y for a morning workout. Raynella says she then went to visit David's elderly and ailing mother, who was in the hospital, and this was around 9:30 a.m., returning home just after 11 a.m. when she claimed to have found David deceased in bed. She also made a stop at her youngest daughter's high school to bring her some medicine, which did not do much to substantiate or dispel her alibi in terms of the time she left or came home, but was part of the sequence of events. The medical examiner, just the next day after David was declared dead, declared that this was no suicide, rather it was a homicide. And if it was a homicide, then the likely suspect was Raynella Leath. But everyone who worked in the DA's office knew Raynella and her first husband, Ed, so there was a serious reluctance to prosecute her. Before Raynella was ever charged, on March 3rd, 2006, David's daughter, Cindy, remember her? He had a child from a previous marriage, filed a civil suit against Raynella, challenging her father's will, leaving the family's property Raynella. But Cindy she did want the family property, but she was looking at the bigger picture. She felt that if she could win, the criminal justice system would have to do something about this. So you can be declared guilty in a civil suit, but what's the difference, Amy, for people who maybe don't know?
Well,
because you can file a wrongful death suit.
In a civil suit, I don't believe it's guilt or innocence, though. It's preponderance of the evidence and
That's
it's
the
liability.
standard. I think you can be found guilty, but the punishment is not the loss of your liberty. The only punishment you're going to suffer is going to be monetary. I'd just like to point out, this was a way that O.J. Simpson or the Goldmans prosecuted O.J. and other people take this route when they can't get justice in the criminal justice system. However, I don't think people realize how absolutely difficult it is to actually collect. You can be very crafty if you're convicted in, a civil court about hiding your assets, putting them in other people's names. And as Kim Goldman described on her podcast, they've never been able to collect even $1 from O.J. Simpson. And they have pushed and tried. And not because they care about the money, but they wanted him to pay a price. And they were never able to enforce it. So just so people have, even if you win in a civil suit, you may never, ever, see anything. Recently there was the verdict over the summer, or before the summer, the Johnny Depp Amber Heard one, in which he was awarded over $10 million. But I've already heard her, her representation saying she can't pay that. So
I don't think he needs the money.
I don't think he needs the money either, but I don't think that was his point.
I think he just wanted to be vindicated.
There are, even if you're awarded or you win in a civil suit, you don't always win. But if you want a guilty verdict or you want the criminal justice system to do something, it makes sense. But in a surprising move, Amy, Raynella filed a countersuit against Cindy, claiming she was the one responsible for her father's death. This was pretty outlandish, and it wasn't taken quite seriously. And while these suits really didn't go anywhere, Amy, Raynella was finally charged with the murder of David Leath. It would require an outside prosecutor, in fact, several, to finally have a grand jury indict Raynella on first-degree murder charges 3.5 years after David died on November 28th, 2006. And get this, though, Amy, she got bond, okay, for the murder trial. Guess how much her bond was? I love doing the guessing game, even though I know you don't like it, but I'm still going to do it.
I mean, I'm going to assume it was light.
Well,
couple
guess.
thousand, 50,000.
50,000, right? Okay, it was $5,000 for murder. Have you
Which
ever
is
heard of
a
this?
joke for her because she's well off, right?
Well, I've never heard of murder. You're either held or the bond is set ridiculously high. I've never heard of $5,000. And I'm not even saying that I disagree because this is still alleged.
Yeah.
But if we're going to talk about uniformity or fairness in the system, I'm going to bet that most people charged with murder in her state are
That's
not
crazy.
given $5,000 bond. And I've never heard of this much for a murder charge before. Raynella was initially charged with David Leath's murder, but interestingly, the medical examiner also decided to take a look at Ed Dossett's death, her first husband. And in a bombshell announcement, the Emmy said that it was in fact a morphine overdose that killed Ed and not the cattle trampling.
Okay, but he could have done that to himself.
Absolutely could have done that to himself.
I'm not saying she didn't do it. I'm just saying he could have.
No, but you had asked, and I
Yeah.
thought that was a good question. Like, how
Yeah.
did the cattle trampling kill him? Well, it killed him because he was so heavily intoxicated with morphine.
Mm-hmm.
It seemed that the original Emmy declared Ed's death prior to receiving those toxicology results. Can you believe that? That's surprising
Do they always do toxicology?
when it's suspicious. Yeah.
Because that was considered suspicious.
That was
that's why.
suspicious,
Okay.
right. So no, not always. But the tox result clearly showed lethal amounts of morphine, saying, quote, "It is unlikely that any human could function in an ambulatory manner or continue to live with those amounts of morphine."
I am happy to hear that in the sense that he did not suffer, because it sounds like that would be quite a painful death.
Yes, of course. But
Yeah.
these results came in. It was never added to the report. It was just forgotten about or left out.
Conveniently.
Very conveniently. But so what does this mean for Raynella? Well, now she's charged with the murders of both of our husbands, earning her the reputation as a black widow.
Uh-huh.
And in 2009, Raynella went to trial for David Leath's murder, held in Knox County, where she was from. So there's no change of venue, which I thought was surprising.
Surprising.
A lot of publicity in this case.
Mhm.
So what happened? Well, it was a circumstantial case and a hard one. The jury could not reach an agreement on a verdict, ending in a hung jury and a mistrial. But the vote was close. Go ahead.
What was the main evidence against her?
It relates mostly to the firearms, the shots that were fired, and then also I'm going to go through it, her story and how some aspects of her story didn't quite make sense, and bloodstain analysis. Okay. And I'll talk about that there's a reason why I'm holding off on it. But okay, so let me just tell you though, it was 11-1 in favor of guilt. So there was one holdout that saved her.
So it sounds like a case that the prosecution's going to try to retry.
Yeah, and those aren't good odds for her. I mean, I'm surprised about that because in that case, if it was me, I might opt for a bench trial. Right? We know a bench trial can be tried in front of a judge.
Mm-hmm.
If you know that 11 people were going to vote you guilty, unless you have a dramatically different strategy, I'd go for the bench trial.
Yep.
But she didn't, and she was tried a second time for the murder of David Leath, and the outcome would be very different this time. She was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. And since she got life for this crime, the prosecutors decided not to pursue the murder charge of her first husband. But why might this be a mistake, Amy?
Well, because judging by the look on your face, I might be right here. It could get overturned. The conviction can get overturned on appeal.
That's correct. So,
and not only that, it's not justice for the rest, the victim's family and closure. And
correct. They just assume because, they kind of slammed the book on it, why go for it? But yeah, if the conviction's overturned on appeal, now, granted, they could prosecute her later, but, that assumption,
yeah,
I wouldn't have worked on that one. And in this case, I definitely wouldn't have bet on this because an appeal is exactly what she got. And she not only got an appeal, she won her appeal.
On the grounds of what?
After 6 years in prison, just so you know.
Oh, wow.
Wait till you hear. And this was one of the reasons I even came across this case. Raynella's appeal is connected to one of our other cases that we covered. The Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom case.
Mm-hmm.
I know, every time we say it, we both...
Yeah.
I know. But do you remember that the judge presiding over one of their cases had a serious drug problem? He was using narcotics quite seriously. He was addicted to Oxycontin.
Oh, it was the same judge in this case.
Correct.
So all of his cases got re-examined?
It was interesting because if you recall, one of the defendants in the Newsom and Christian case had appealed his sentence as well, but that appeal did not win.
Yeah.
So I'm sure, I would bet that almost everyone appealed, but whether or not they won Just
Another story.
depends,
Yep.
yeah, on the discretion of, the appellate judges. But in this case, her appeal was granted based on the judge's drug use, and whoa, what a game changer this would be. In May 2017, the third trial against 68-year-old Raynella Leath began. And in this case, the prosecution would focus a lot on the firearm and the order of the shots fired. They used experts to try and show that the first bullet hit the headboard, the second hit Mr. Leath in his head, and the third went through the mattress. Do you know why the ordering is important?
Yes, because if he shot himself, there could not be a third.
That's exactly right. If he was struck in the head by the second bullet and killed, he could not have fired that third shot. That would have to be someone else, according to the medical examiner, because Leath would have been, as the Emmy described, incapacitated immediately by the shot to his head. And you can tell the order of the shots fired because the Colt revolver had a clockwise rotation of the cylinder that showed a pretty clear order of the bullets fired. So that was kind of interesting because this is, you had asked about the evidence.
It's as objective as it comes, right?
It's pretty objective, I think. In the revolver, you can tell the sequence of bullets by the, the grooves that are made on each, on the wheel. So you can tell. It's pretty clear.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not the only evidence, though. The prosecution, they called David's daughter Cindy to the stand, who testified that Raynella had called her at work that morning, her father died, to ask if she had seen her father. And, the prosecution said this was probably an attempt to show that she wasn't at home during this time. But the phone call would kind of backfire because Raynella called her just 20 minutes after she left the home, in which she had said, David said, I'm going to go to the Y later. So there was no reason to be worried about David. I know this isn't a smoking gun per se, but it doesn't make sense. And Cindy said, furthermore, Raynella never called me at work. So 20 minutes after she left the home, she wanted to know if she'd seen her husband. It was odd.
Mm-hmm.
Raynella also mentioned to Cindy that she was worried because David had not finished his breakfast. But how would she know that, as she originally claimed she left breakfast for him on the nightstand and left before he ate it?
All right. So
again, these are circumstantial pieces, but when you put the pieces of the puzzle together, it doesn't look good. I'm not saying, again, this is the most damning evidence. The prosecution presented toxicology reports showing David had both prescribed and unprescribed drugs in his system. So there was some argument, did he take these on his own? Did she give them? I wouldn't say this is the strongest evidence in the case, but I would say that the state also focused on blood spatter, which they say showed that David's head was in a different position that it should have been had Raynella found him on the bed the way that she said she did, and if he had shot himself. Blood spatter is also somewhat subjective, just so you know. It's not the most definitive science. It can be. But I think the stronger evidence was as it pertained to the food tray Raynella left for her husband on the nightstand, because there was blood spatter on the nightstand and on everything on it except the items on the food tray. There was even blood spatter underneath the tray. So it looked like the tray wasn't there when he was killed, but she placed it on the table.
That's a big point.
Yeah, I think that one was a good one. The defense, however, disputed this and used their own experts to show that multiple shot suicides are possible, and they are. And even if the prosecution's ordering if the bullets are correct, it still could have been at the hand of David Leath, and that there could have been what's known as a jerk reaction after he shot himself.
Okay.
That happens too.
Mm-hmm.
They claim that the Emmy ruled way too quickly as well, without any tox results or medical results from his treating physician. And they showed that David was feeling pretty badly about his condition. He was upset. He was depressed. And he had, what they were trying to show is that Raynella wasn't the only possible person who could have caused his death. David was also a possibility here.
I'm assuming you would have said this, but did they look at gunshot residue if he was shot with his left hand versus his right hand? And
yeah, and they found prints.
Okay.
They found his prints on the hand where it looked like, and they did not find residue on her. So, but you can also wash residue off.
But I'm saying they found residue on him and his fingerprints on the gun. Okay.
Yeah, they did. So what would the jury conclude this time? Well, Amy, they didn't have the opportunity to make any conclusion because there was another shocker coming in this case. Before the jurors could deliberate, the defense made a very common motion to dismiss the case for lack of evidence. Mm-hmm. You've heard this.
Yeah. It doesn't usually go anywhere.
No, it's a very common tactic, one that is usually pro forma and is usually dismissed by the presiding judge in criminal trials.
But it's almost like, why not try? There's no harm.
Exactly. No harm, no foul. Nobody expected that it would work, but that's exactly what happened here.
The judge
Yes.
dismissed.
The judge granted the motion, saying that the state did not make their case, and the judge acquitted Raynella Leath of murder right there on the spot.
Wow.
Game
That's
changer,
shocking.
right? It is. Everyone was shocked, and the jurors were appalled. How could this happen? The presiding judge spoke out. And by the way, because he acquitted her, that means double jeopardy is attached, which means she can never be tried again.
But she could be tried for her first husband.
That is correct. Yeah. And she did serve 6 years in prison. So I think she was as shocked, it looked like, as everyone else. The presiding judge, Judge Summers, spoke to the media and in an interview with Erin Moriarty said that he decided to end this case when he realized the evidence was legally insufficient, and he did not think the prosecution made the case that Raynella was the perpetrator of the crime. He stated further, he believed David's death could definitely be the result of a homicide, but that it was just as likely that it was a homicide committed by someone else, and that there wasn't enough evidence to establish that Raynella was the one who killed David.
Did the defense ever go down the path of this could have been someone else? Did they check for it? Was it there a break-in? Was the door unlocked? Like, where does this come from?
No, they really focused on, I mean, I'm not saying that they didn't at some point, but from everything I gleaned, they really focused on David as being possibly the other suspect. They did not really point to anyone else. It seemed obvious. I mean, there wasn't any motive for anyone else either.
Yeah.
But so what the judge was seeing, that's kind of surprising. How is the judge seeing this motive that no one else is? Yeah, there's nothing taken. Nobody had a grudge against him. There's no sexual assault. There's no...
Any relationship with the judge and Raynella or any of Raynella's associates?
Yeah, I was looking into that too. I didn't see that. However, you can argue that she had a relationship with kind of everyone, the bench, or just, the general institution. This was, again, just like a bombshell. So I'd like to talk about a couple of things, because this is the end of the story, kind of. But one of the reasons I chose it is because of this judge's decisions, or the judicial decision, and I really want to talk about that. So first, let's start with theory. Raynella may or may not have been involved in her first husband's death. I think she probably staged it with him. I think she was involved, but I don't think she murdered him. We don't know enough. She possibly could have. I don't think so, though. The assault on Steve Walker was premeditated, it seemed. This time Raynella was concerned possibly about two things. The speculation was maybe she was concerned about the reputation of her husband. However, this was really soon after the loss of her son. And some people thought that, she was yelling at him, "I'm going to take your son." So maybe in her irrational kind of thinking at the time, she saw this as a chance to have a son back, because it was Ed's son. So she thought, well, if Steve's out of the way, maybe she even thought if Kay's out of the way, this will be my son. I'm not sure that that's what she was thinking. This is definitely speculation. However, regardless, this is the result of rational choice planning, even if it wasn't rational. If you ask me, she saw eliminating Steve as, the object to possibly getting Ed's biological son. You might say that strain theory plays a role here, because one of the major stressors that causes criminal behavior is the loss of something you love, and she lost her son.
And also found out that her husband was cheating on her.
Right. So this is complete strain theory. But even with these stressors, her reaction was to go ahead and plan to try to murder this person, which she clearly did.
Why would she not go after the wife?
That surprised me as well. I really don't know. And I don't know if that was even in the plans, or if because he was the one who contacted her. I'm not sure what the reason is, but it's a good question. You have the death now of David Leath. Now, I don't know that there isn't reasonable doubt here, but if I had to guess motive, I think she saw her husband as an obstacle that she'd have to take care of. And I think she killed him and tried to make it like a suicide. I think, again, this is kind of the product of, maybe not total rational, but her rational choice, making decisions, planning his death, taking over the property.
Did they have a contentious relationship as far as we know?
Apparently, when he did start showing some symptoms of dementia, he was, I don't know if I would call it contentious, but he was getting crankier, and you know what I mean? So I think that there started to be some friction that I think she viewed as a nuisance. I wonder if she also this is speculation, but she had taken care of a dying husband once before, and that was kind of the love of her life. I wonder if she didn't want to go through this again.
Yeah.
I mean, that's, the best I could say. Looking at Raynella, also, she wasn't punished or charged with Ed's death. I just want you to think about this. Her daughter got away with a crime that she helped, and she was barely punished for an attempted murder. And so if you look at these behaviors over time and the consequence or lack thereof, what do you see?
Differential reinforcement. I wouldn't be surprised if she finds herself in another situation where somebody's mysteriously dead.
Do you know, I was thinking the same thing. And differential reinforcement, I was thinking this woman seems to be able to get away with things over and over again.
She's pretty much being told that she can keep doing, assuming she did these things.
Assuming she did it, which we
assuming
don't know.
she did
Yes,
something
we
or
don't
knew
know.
something, then she's being sent the message that she'll keep getting away with it.
I think there's a message there. I also think that we have to look at chivalry of the system as it pertains to people didn't want to punish a demure, respectable, affluent female. I think she received all the benefit of the doubt because of her status.
I also think that if she is innocent, she has some really shitty luck.
Well, that's why in my opener I said bad luck has a
Yeah.
way of following this woman, because if she's innocent, you're right. This is some very bad luck. I don't think I know enough to say about David, but I can tell you I found Steve Walker very credible, and I totally believe she attempted to murder him. So she is at least guilty of one crime.
And that also shows that she has violent tendencies.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because she wasn't, she was in her, I think at that point, maybe her late 40s. But, we're not talking about aging out of crime here.
No.
This is.
Well,
an
that
older
also
woman.
it also makes me think this wasn't her first crime.
Exactly. And as you said, I'm not sure it'll be her last.
Yeah.
I wouldn't get involved with her. That's all I'm saying.
No.
The ultimate question here, though, for me, and the reason I chose this case was whether or not the criminal justice system get it right. And I don't mean necessarily as it pertains to guilt and innocence. What I mean is that third trial judge exercised his right to dismiss the case. The question here is, should he have done so? When we talk about judicial discretion, does he see because he knows the evidence, and does he see possible jury nullification happening? Or is he taking advantage of his power?
He's not taking advantage. He's within his right to do so.
He was within his rights.
And
Do we like that?
No, I don't know. I kind of, to me, by allowing judges to do that, it negates trial by jury. Which it does. It negates trial by jury.
It literally does, right?
It literally does. So it almost seems contradictory.
So here's the problem. If he did it because he really believed the evidence is legally insufficient to make a case against Raynella, then I would be more supportive, but I don't think that it was insufficient. And I also think, to be perfectly frank, that he had a sense that the jurors were going to convict her, because several jurors spoke out later indicating that their intention was to find Raynella guilty.
So he must just truly believe that she's innocent, or there's something we don't know, right? Because this was in the same, they didn't do a change of venue for this trial either.
No, they didn't. No. Regardless, the jury they were really angry.
You spend a lot of time and a lot of energy, and it's very emotionally taxing to sit on a jury.
And she could have opted for a bench trial.
She could have.
So instead, the juror went through the whole process. They were going to find her guilty, most likely. And a judge stepped in and said, no, I'm not going to allow this to happen.
Do you know if he had a history of doing that?
No, he didn't. No. And Aaron Moriarty kind of pressed him on the show. Was like, did you just want to stop this case? And he was like, yeah, pretty much. And so I exercised my right to do so. I don't think he was hiding behind anything, except it's interesting to me because I just don't know if he made the decision for the right reason. If it was for the right reason, then I could support it and get behind it, but I'm not sure. But I like the conversation. And for now, Raynella Leath is a free woman. She has not been charged with any activity in Ed Dossett's death.
Single and looking to mingle?
I mean, that's what I was thinking, right? I don't know what her current status is, but, I hope that we don't see her again in the courts, Amy.
Actually, I hope that she was in fact innocent, because then we can say justice has been served here.
That's absolutely true, and I hope so. And she's in her 70s now,
Yeah,
so I also
okay.
hope that no matter what, she's aged out of crime.
Wow, lots of twists and turns.
Yeah,
I didn't know where you were going with this one.
I didn't know
It's
where
really good.
I didn't know where I was going with it either, but
Really interesting.
all right. If you want to discuss this conversation with us, if you have opinions about judicial discretion and on this case or others, feel free to reach out to us. We look forward to discussing this case and others, find us on Instagram, Facebook, and at womenandcrimepodcast.com. All right, thank you so much, everyone, for listening today, and we'll see you next time on Women in Crime. Women in Crime is written and hosted by Meghan Sachs and Amy Shlosberg. Our producer and editor is James Varga. Music composition is by Desert Media. If you enjoy the show, please remember to subscribe and leave a review. You can also support the show through Patreon, where you can get access to additional ad-free content such as virtual happy hours and an extra full-length episode each month. For more information, visit patreon.com/womenincrime. Sources for today's episode include CBS News, an episode of 48 Hours, Knox News, New York Times, Findlaw, and an episode of Snapped.